donut in front of me or ice cream or something, it's almost aversive to me, and I don't know what happened. I don't know what changed.
Probably a scientific explanation.
Sure.
It has to do with maybe
Neuron
loss.
dementia.
The sugar, the desire for that rush maybe is gone from your soul. What was the most delicious things? Croissant, donuts. What is there a thing that
There's a place in Portland, I don't know if it's still open, called Little T's Bakery, and they have croissants that easily rival the croissants in Paris. People make a lot of the pastry in Paris, but it's really the bread in Paris that's amazing. We lived there when I was a kid. We did a sabbatical there. And, there they do the baguette morning bake and afternoon bake. And there's nothing like the bread in Paris for the people, But if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you can find amazing croissants there.
What do you do with the croissant? What do you do with the bread? Butter, or is it just
actually, I don't eat them anymore. I don't have much of an appetite for them, even though they're not a sweet food. But I'm always putting butter on the butter. No jam. I would never adulterate.
I have to actually be honest about this because people talk about steak and they talk about bread with butter. I feel like butter is cheap. I feel like you're disrespecting the fundamental food by adding butter. Because butter is it's like a elite version of ketchup.
Well, there we diverge because for me, bread is just a vehicle for butter. A cracker is just a vehicle.
Oh, so that's just the cracker and the bread is just texture.
It's just that people look at you funny if you just eat the butter straight, which occasionally I do.
I got it.
But so I put a little piece of bread underneath it, not because I'm a low carb, strict low carbs, but just because otherwise it gets funny.
It's like pasta is a vehicle for pasta sauce. It's interesting. I like Indian non-bread. You have bread. I've had a lot of soul searching on which part of India brings me so much joy. Is it the bread or is it all the sauce?
But there we diverge again because for whatever reason, no disrespect to anyone, but Indian food doesn't appeal.
Well, you're a lucky man because the number of calories in that food is like non-bread. I don't know how non-bread is made, but I think it's just soaked in oil and it's just very intensely. Like the density of calories is very, very high. For me, barbecue, I would say, is probably
anytime I start thinking about barbecue. I do love meat. My dad's Argentinian. I love steak. In Argentina, chorizo sausage is an appetizer before you have steak.
So, it's meat on top of meat.
And it's not just the men, right? You see women, sometimes very petite women, eating steaks that are bigger than their skull size. Slowly, they eat very slowly, and they all eat dessert too. And they generally do this over 1 meal per day. They get kind of reflex.
That's how I think about it, because I also eat 1 meal a day, especially when I'm traveling. It feels like a cheap meal because it gives you a bit more freedom to just lose yourself in the quantity of the food. I did the 3-day fast, and I ate chicken breast, like literally chicken breast and nothing else, just grilled, and it was the most delicious piece of meat I've ever eaten. And that gives you. The problem is when you fast for 3 days, you really can't pig out. You really shouldn't.
Well, your stomach will shrink in size already. Your gut microbiome is almost completely depleted by fasting. A lot of people think, cleanses and fasts are great for microbiome. They quash your microbiome. However, when you start eating again, the microbiome comes back better than it was before you fast.
For people who don't know, Sergey and Todd are on the call. They're kind of pulling stuff up. They just pulled up Phelps with I forget how many calories he's eating, 10,000.
You know what's interesting? There's some cool physiology around this. The reason he needed to eat so much is not that he was burning that many calories in pure movement. It's that when you do exercise in water, even if it's warm water, the heat transfer in water is greater, so you burn far more calories. And again, here I'm admittedly lifting that from knowledge that was passed on to me by Tim Ferriss. But I checked it out, and it's absolutely true. So if you exercise in water, even if it's not really cold water, your caloric needs go way up, which is why you get out of the pool, you're often really cold.
And for fans of the Humor and Laugh podcast, and if you're not a fan, what are you doing in your life? You would probably chuckle at the fact that Andrew just cited his sources even on that statement. Because you're so good at it. I don't know how your memory works, but the only person whose memory is better than Joe Rogan is yours.
But my colleagues joke, PubMed sort of scrolls through my mind. Also, in science, as you know, attribution is so baked into what we do. And I think that it's interesting because now spending a lot of time on social media, attribution is not as common. And but in academia, you learn really early on that if you give a talk about your data and you cite all these amazing sources, all it does is make you look better. Right? Whereas in social media and elsewhere in the business sector, it's almost like citing other people. People feel as if it's going to take away some of the credit. All it does is place you in the company of people that do really nice work. So I have genuine and tremendous respect for Tim. He's been about 10 years ahead on a huge number of health-related things and other things. He's an extremely kind person, very thoughtful person. So it's also just a pleasure to shine light on other people.
Yeah. Well, I actually push back. I know there's a culture of if you write a paper, standing on the shoulders of giants is a powerful thing. But there's also a culture of not giving credit to the strongest idea of the paper and instead say it's kind of or imply that it's original. There is a culture of kind of not celebrating others. I think people get most competitive in all walks of life, but especially in science, when the closer they get in exactly the thing they work on. And so there's this dance. There's a few researchers in each of the individual little things that you work on. If you're studying a particular kind of ant, you know that other asshole that also is studying that particular ant. And then you're not going to often give credit for the brilliant ideas that other researcher is doing. And I think one of the things you've discovered, and just as part of your nature, and which is why it's really great that you have an audience and you inspire others to do the same, is you celebrate that other ant to study with. It's great, and everybody wants to raise all boats. But that initial instinct to be like, what is it for? If my neighbor gets a toaster, I get a bigger toaster.
Yeah, that mindset. It's not that I'm not competitive in certain domains, but yeah, I get great pleasure from sharing things that I find, and I think that at the end of the day, you're as strong as your community, and you can build a wonderful community just by pointing out things that you love. Like these are all just loves. I see a paper and I love it. Only rarely do I think, oh, I wish we had done that. I usually think, fantastic, now I can just focus on something else because they check off that box.
And by the way, you mentioned PubMed and barbecue. I should mention that I got a chance to hang out with Rick Rubin thanks to you. He's a friend of yours, and you made the connection. That was a huge gift to my spirit. I guess he's a truly, truly special human being. And there's a lot I could say about why he's a special human being. I'd love to know how you met him, but I should also just mention on the PubMed thing, it was so interesting talking to him about music, and both on the podcast and privately, and just listening to music together. Because when you mention a song, he does this thing where he like closes his eyes and he finds that song in the album that we're talking about, and he steps through the album. You could see the brain like stepping through individual songs to find that song in the album. And there's that kind of look up process, and then he puts himself mentally in that space of like, okay, this is whatever the album is, and not just the ones he produced, but all these, an encyclopedia of music. And it's so interesting. It also, the thing I really love about it is something like a calmness that radiates from you. It's okay to close your eyes, place yourself in the place where that album was recorded, in the feeling of that album, like that silence. Let's go there. Let's go there together. It's like Alice in Wonderland. We'll go there together.
You do a good Rick Rubin, minus the beard.
Minus the beard.
His beard was epic, right? You can't fake a beard.
How'd you guys meet?
Yeah, well, Rick, I'm very blessed to consider a close friend. Rick and I got introduced to a common friend during the pandemic, and we started doing some FaceTime together, just talking about things related to science and health. I'm not a musician. I have musical ability or talent. I have a good ability to memorize lyrics, and I love lyrics, and I love poetry. So I asked him a lot of questions about musicians that I happen to love that he's worked with and knows, and so he would give me stories about musicians, and I would talk to him about health, and then eventually we formed a friendship where we would talk about a number of different topics in life. And then we started spending time together person when he was in town. And as you now know, Rick, in addition to all his incredible accomplishments, has an incredible understanding of how to get the brain and body into state, right? And as you pointed out, he's willing to do the things that allow him to help these incredible artists get into the best state to do their craft. And so if he needs to sit there and be quiet with his eyes closed for a minute or two or more, he'll do that. He has routines to allow himself to get into state. And it's really inspired me to think about states of mind as something that, we'd all love to just flip the switch and say we're focused or we're creative, but to actually ratchet through the challenging steps in order to do that and to figure out what one needs to do on a regular basis to get into a proper state. It's not just going to come from a cup of coffee, a lamp of a particular wavelength or something. It's going to be those things, but it's also going to be really teaching oneself how to get into proper state.
Yeah, you did an episode on hypnosis. Do you think it's a kind of self-hypnosis?
Yeah, I do. Because hypnosis is you limit the context, you're very alert, and you're very calm. And he has a number of these different practices, and so we will talk about those. And then we also have enjoyed a lot of discussions about deep neuroscience. In fact, I introduced Rick to a friend of mine who's a neurosurgeon and neuroscientist, and they've become friendly. Rick is one of these people that he sort of defies definition. Incredibly kind, incredibly private person too. So I'm being respectful of that. But and then of course he's a podcast. So when I learned that, I just made natural sense to introduce you. And I know he really enjoyed meeting you. And we talk about you a lot, and of course in a positive light. I think his dedication to getting into these states of mind and his willingness to do that has completely transformed my routines around life. Like, for instance, before doing a very long podcast recording, the solo ones, which often take me several hours or more, 6 hours to record, sometimes more, sometimes less, I realized that there's a certain brain state associated with that. So I have to really limit the kind of interactions I have for the 2 hours before. I actually walk and talk out loud through my neighborhood. People think I'm crazy, but I live in a neighborhood where there are a lot of crazy creatives anyway. So
saying you're not crazy.
Well, at least institutionally, yes. But getting into state of mind is something that we all just imagine flip the switch. But Rick really convinced me you have to do the work to do the work.
Can you maybe linger on that, at least a little bit more, your process, like how you get in that space? That's really interesting because I have to admit, I do everything last minute for podcasts. I don't know, there's a lot of anxiety because, whatever, if I have to pack, if I have to set up stuff. You were luckily a few minutes. You showed up a few minutes later,
which we're not academics, right?
Right on time. But the stress is immense, and on top of that, you look at a situation with Rick Rubin. He's out. I had to set up microphones in front of him. And just that stress, the anxiety.
He knows a lot about microphones.
What did he say? I really loved. He's like, how close do you like the microphone to be? You think
that's a very Rick Rubin kind of thing, right? That the details really matter. The details really matter, right down to your relationship to the microphone.
Yeah,
distance and whether or not it brings out the tone. But of course, this is what he does. He produces music.
Right? But he also said, he is the professional. He said, how close do you like it to be? And he said it with a gentleness where I had an existential crisis, where I don't know. He gave me so much wow, he made me feel like an artist. That the microphone distance is a decision you're supposed to make.
Well, I have to say, and this has actually come up in some of our conversations, but you are an artist. And actually, Joe Rogan, once I heard him talking about podcasting and the fact that he's always trying to get better at it. He described podcasting as an art, right? And it is. It's a certain medium of communication, and there's a cadence and a rhythm that, when it's working, it really can facilitate the transfer of information. But it's not, it doesn't. Obviously, Joe, just being himself, has tapped into that cadence that allows and has made so many people excited to hear him talk.
Well, in his case and in general, I think part of the art is refusing the world as you get a bigger audience, change who you are.
There's one quote that I've seen out there where he says, I'm like talking about himself, he says, I'm like the fish that got through the net. There's no stage version of me, right? How he is in person is how he is, out in the world. And of course, there's nuance to his life, right? And his different relationships, of course. But it's true. I mean, we've had the great fortune of spending time with him out away from the microphones, so to speak. Joe is Joe.
So can you speak to that process? You mentioned the walking and the talking to yourself. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I try and do a couple of things. First of all, when I was a kid, I had a little bit of a grunting tick. When I was 5 or 6, I feel this buildup of tension in my throat, and I would do this grunting tick. If I get very tired, I start to get still. We actually know that this is related to these basal ganglia circuits with go, no go. You got an accelerator and a brake, basically, in your neural circuitry. And kids with Tourette's and OCD, the brake doesn't work quite as well. And so one thing that happens is if I wake up in the morning, and especially if I'm well rested, well, if I'm not well rested, I do a hypnosis or yoga nidra in order to recover my sleep. That works really well. But then once I'm into the process of preparing the podcast, I've already gone through my notes. I know what I want to say more or less, kind of general contour. And then I take a walk, and I try to, so no phone with me, and I try to assess whether or not my energy is too high or too low for podcasting. Because when you podcast, as you know, you have to punch out a lot of material, but then there's times when you slow down and emphasize and articulate. And so what I do, I've never revealed this, what I do actually is I will recite the lyrics of songs for about 10 minutes, songs I love, while I walk out loud.
It calms you and focuses you. What does it do?
I think it gets my vocal cords warmed up, and it also...
Do you sing or speak?
I often sing them, and unfortunately nobody hears. And as I do this, I start to evaluate whether or not I'm straining to get the words out, or whether or not I'm straining to make them slow enough so that I can articulate. So there are days when I have so much energy that I try to speak faster than I should in order to articulate properly. There are other days when I'm tired and I can't sort of keep up with my thoughts. And so what I try and do is assess that and then adjust the transmission, the RPM, so to speak, first that I can speak very quickly and then I can slow down. So I can change the cadence of my voice. And when you teach in the classroom, you learn, as you know, because you're an excellent teacher, lectures in the classroom, as you teach in the classroom, when you want to slow down, every teacher knows you turn to the whiteboard or chalkboard and you start writing, right? It gives you a break. And then you turn around and you fire back the kind of machine gun fire of information, and then you slow down or you underline something. When you podcast, you don't have that opportunity. There are no visuals in the podcast. So what I try and do is always get my voice warmed up and make sure that I'm thinking and speaking at approximately the same rate. And then I also do this thing that is, I put my vision into panoramic vision when I walk, which is very common. And then I actually start to remind myself of the purpose of podcasting. It sounds very mission statement-y, but you asked what I do. I remind myself first and foremost that what I want to communicate, what I want to come through is the beauty and utility of biology. And I only feel comfortable with saying the word beauty publicly now about science things thanks to you, because I think...
Love and beauty.
Yeah, love and beauty.
Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Love and beauty, but also darkness and hatred. If you're talking about the live streaming podcast, you have to address the shadow, also the shadow side. But I think about I want to communicate the beauty and utility of biology, and then I check my emotional state. I want to make sure that I'm not angry about anything, and certainly if I am, then I'm going to set it aside for the podcast, because that's not a place for my whatever I might be dealing with. I also really start to feel into the parts of the research and the papers I found that I really love, because that's the part of me that I like the most, frankly. And on the podcast, if there's a paper, like for instance, we have a podcast coming out soon about heat as a tool, sauna, but some other things. And in researching this, I learned so much about these heat shock proteins and the use of sauna in Finland for increasing growth hormone, but also for the treatment of mental illness. And I realized I fell in love with this literature. It's just a beautiful literature. These people are true pioneers for doing this work. Now everyone's in the sauna, but this was 20 years ago. The way the experiments were done were amazing, with all these Finnish people with thermocouples up their rectum to measure temperature, swimming in pools. It's hilarious and great. So I start to think about it, and I think, I just start to really access my love of the work. And then when we finally sit down, and my producer Rob and I and record, I just sort of want to just bask in sharing. Just like the little version of me when I was 6 or 7, I used to spend all weekend reading the encyclopedia, Guinness Book of World Records, making my mother drive me places to introduce me to. I had this obsession with trapping animals when I was a kid. Meet these people, and then on Monday I would insist on giving a lecture class to the kids. So that's basically what it is. I just try and access that childlike energy, and so I want to be clear. The goal is always to make the information interesting, clear, and actionable, and it's also surprising. But that's basically the process. But yeah, I'm singing and talking and getting into state. And I used to feel very sheepish about sharing any of this. It's the first time I've ever shared it out loud. But Rick was the one who encouraged me to find a process that works and continue to develop that process and not let anything get near that process. People in my personal life know this, and when it's time, it's like, I don't care what else is going on. I'm moving into that brain state.
There's probably a process like that for anything that you do in life that you take seriously. So the people that perfected this is athletes, like Olympic level athletes, they have to have a process like this.
No, and I think Tiger Woods actually was taught self-hypnosis quite young, and used self-hypnosis often during his tournaments, sometimes to great success and other times less.
Is there other places in life that you use kind of a protocol, like a mental protocol to get ready?
Many of the best areas of life are their own form of hypnosis, right?
Sure.
You know that you're in hypnosis if, for instance, you're in a movie and something happens and you feel the emotional lift without being self-conscious about it. Yes, I think that one thing that we've tried to do in our house is around meal times to try and set a state that food isn't just something that we just throw down our throats. And I'm fortunate that my partner cooks really well, and so I try and give her the space to do that. And that's a whole thing of her getting into state. And then
For the cooking,
the
preparation of all
I can just see it. I just see the way she approaches the whole thing and the pleasure of serving it. And I'm an eater, not a cooker. But
both are important roles. You can be a very good eater. Like there's something about, is there anything better in this world than that feeling, especially with the family, getting around a table, just the warmth of that. I don't know, it's like the cold outside of the cruel world cannot touch you in this place that you return to. And if, I mean,
did you grow up eating meals as a kid?
yeah.
I mean, no television.
No, well, I didn't really have television, period, outside of meals. So most of my time was spent, like a stray cat, outdoors, running around, playing soccer.
Imagine you're in this like dirt or concrete lot between two very high-rise buildings, playing soccer in like athletic gear that you only see in Eastern Europe. You know how like you come to the States and people wear their athletic gear. You go to Europe and you see here's the soccer culture, but you see athletic gear that you just don't see anywhere else.
That's interesting. I mean, I grew up pretty poor, so first of all, I was always wearing my brother's, who's an older brother's clothes. And they were like old, my favorite things were American things that I didn't understand. It would be like a Pepsi shirt or something. And it was just, that was the gear. And it was like too large for me, but I thought I was the coolest person ever, just wearing this fancy, like Kanye, like type of fashion.
There's something about it. I feel like in Eastern Europe, they wear athletic gear with like the guys that zip up.
Yeah, that's like fancy stuff. That's if you like, those are the cool kids. I see. Like the cool soccer players, football players that, like they were in a league of some kind, so they would get uniforms, or they somehow. I always thought anyone who had anything nice had to do something really bad to get it. That was my way to view of the world, because like Uh, I guess I didn't understand how it's possible to be rich. Because most of us were surrounded by people who are poor, and that life is beautiful and simple. It's like, why do you escape that life? But you still admire the cool, like, when we got McDonald's, it was like, what kind of world does this place come from? Like, who invented this? This is a fascinating view from a child's perspective of capitalism, essentially.
Yeah. But the fact you ate dinner together is really interesting. My parents divorced when I was an adolescent, so then there was a total fracture of any family structure. But prior to that, we ate dinner together every night. I was expected to know how to use my knife and fork. And, it was like a very structured thing. I don't know if I ever have kids, they're going to do that. Certainly. Actually, on the way over here, I was thinking, I really wanted a lot of kids. I wanted like a whole litter. And I was thinking, if Lex has kids and I have kids, then we can like pit them against each other with jujitsu. Yeah, this is my chance at redemption.
The long game.
Soccer, right? They'll all want to be engineers or physicists.
Yeah.
They won't want to be biologists. But in all seriousness, I look forward to the day that our kids play together.
Yeah, I think there's something, such as the family dinner, the ritual of the family dinner, like that, but also the special occasion dinners. But there's a little bit more preparation, a little bit more cooking, whether it's on the weekend or some holiday. In Russia, it was a thing that actually I find completely missing for the most part. In America, is there was neighbors. There was you broke the walls between families much more commonly. Like there would be kind of regular characters, like a sitcom almost. If you watch a sitcom, it's never just the family. There's always like other characters that's bursting in the door.
I'm gonna start doing that here. Just to make you feel at home. Just start showing up exactly. I know where you live.
I think people want to respect, Michael Mouse that lives next door, and I think people want to respect each other's privacy or something like that. And I think we all get super busy, and, you know, like it's kind of work to do this dinner together, or if you see it as a thing that needs to be scheduled, it's work. You get busy. There's a lot of stuff going on, but if it's part of a ritual or part of the culture, all of those walls get broken down, and then you realize that that's like later looking back, those are the things you miss. Like that's what life is about. Like all the stupid stuff you're doing in terms of career or whatever, all the busy things, those don't matter. What matters is
In academia, it's changed in the last few years, of course. But one of the great joys was professors would stop by your office or your lab. Nobody set up an appointment. There's a guy when I was a professor in San Diego, a guy named Harvey Cardenay's member of the National Academy. He's truly the world's expert in the evolution of vision and evolution of brains in general. And he would show up in my lab and he would just start talking to the students and postdocs. And a pure encyclopedia. And then at some point he'd say, "Hey, Harvey, I gotta go." You'd kick him out, right? Or this guy, he's a physicist, David Kleinfeld, who's the same way. Actually, David Kleinfeld's interesting one. A student of his, went on to create the Beavis and Butthead cartoon, and one of them was David. He's a physics professor. Now people can look him up. And David's one of those guys who just walk into your office, you just sit down, and you just start talking to him. And so there's a kind of a family feel. It's like Cheers or Seinfeld or one of those shows where someone just walks in. Yeah, I think you and I both share a love of the community around things. And podcasting is a little bit more isolated. I should say for the guest episodes, the preparation is completely different because it's more conversation. And so there I don't do any of this business of putting myself into state. I just try and make sure that the guest is taken care of. And I do list out the questions I'm going to ask before. But those, I actually really like the interview episodes far more than I like doing the solo ones.
just psychologically.
I just like learning from someone directly.
Yeah.
Because you asking an expert about something, like sitting here with you when we recorded a podcast where you were a guest on the People in That podcast, and for the first time, and finally, someone was explaining to me the difference between machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all these other things. And I've finally forgiven you for making me cry about Costello. But it helped me move through it. But in all seriousness, the interview ones are a sheer pleasure. The solo ones I really enjoy, but they're work. So I
Well, it's interesting because do think prepping for interviews is having a similar process might be also very valuable. Like I have to think about that because I think when you do a conversation for several hours, especially when it's a high stakes one, it's not like what you and I now. It's more like it's just chatting and so on.
World order is that recorded. Although you never know.
You never know.
Knowing you, will probably be into some pretty controversial topics.
Oh,
You
boy.
like to ride the edge.
Oh boy.
There are a number of topics obviously I just completely avoid, and my response to those is always that I have a lot of opinions about that, but not a lot to say. But whereas you've become far braver in terms of the topics you'll encounter, and some of your guests have been very controversial, right?
Yeah.
Some of them are people that a lot of people don't like, and you've been willing to just sit down and maybe it's the jiu-jitsu thing.
I don't know. It is tricky. One of my goals for this year is to talk to people that a lot of people really don't know.
And here I am.
But people like president, like major political leaders have been thinking a lot about how to talk to really difficult, controversial figures, but find together something with them that's deeply honest about their nature, about the ideas they have about the world, like reveal something real. And some people, you have to be very careful. Some people are very good at hiding the real inside them, even from themselves. That's something I think about a lot. I think about dictators of the past. I put myself in the mindset. Well, how do you reveal something real about this person to themselves? I think that to me, you kind of spoke to that, but a great conversation is one where both of you discover something real. Like it's not just. So I love that too. That's my favorite thing that you mentioned, which is allowing your curiosity to ask all kinds of questions, and get excited and to learn from an expert, but also to push them to discover something about themselves, about their ideas together, and then that discovery. And sometimes it's like we don't see it in the moment, but the audience hears it. It's weird to say. Like I would compare it to when you're a musician, you're playing with other musicians. You lose yourself in the moment. Yeah, it's all. It's like it's working right. It's working, but you don't really see the big picture impact of what it's working right actually feels like, and that's where the audience can see that. Like if you talk to somebody evil, uh, for me as an interviewer, I have to empathize with that person. If I want to understand, I have to put myself in that mind space. And to put yourself in that mindset, you really have to become that. You have to understand the evil inside of you. Like you can't just think if somebody's in power and has used that power to abuse others. You can't just be I personally, a person who seeks to understand. You can't just be a journalist asking generic questions. You have to put yourself in a place where you're somebody who's given a lot of power and slowly start to abuse that power. And what does that person become? Who are you? I have to plug myself into those moments in my life in the past where I've been angry at something, and where I've been cruel because I was angry in little ways. But then you magnify them on scale, and I have to go there, and that's very human. And then I have to look at another person from across the table from you and understand, well, you're there too. And then you had more opportunity to do truly cool things. And then where again I have to plug myself into places where I've been. Okay, imagine I could go where I was cruel to others and was unaware of it. So I was in a mind space where I was thinking I'm doing good and I was doing not good. Again, I've never gotten an opportunity to do any of those things at large scale, but all of us have done it at a small scale. And I plug myself into that, and then we're here. We're two. If it's somebody who's in prison, if it's somebody who's a dictator, we're in that space. But evil is all of us have the capacity to do that evil, and I have to imagine myself being able to do that evil. And then we're here together in that. dark place. And then if it's just right, something real can actually come. Something from that person's childhood, maybe awakening to realization that I thought I was a good person and I'm not. But that only happens when you truly empathize. Those moments of discovery are beautiful. But they also happen in science. When you just have a conversation, and you realize, I feel like talking to Stephen Wolf, right? I feel like we constantly realize beautiful things together.
On this element of evil and sociopathy, that Jung had this notion that we have all things inside us, and that we all have the capacity to be good or evil, etc. Um, but that I have the good fortune of working with somebody who has deep understanding of psychiatry, but also psychoanalysis and theory. And and he said to me recently, he said, whether or not all people have all things inside them is still debated in the psychology community and in the neuroscience community, and as a matter of philosophy. But there are certain people, not many, but there are certain people who they've actually lived out many versions of their possible selves in the first person. And so those are unique individuals. And even if they tapped into these things as you mentioned, at a minor level, as opposed to impacting people negatively at scale. So being able to access those different parts of oneself is key, and you've been willing to step into that. My podcast is how one in which we get down to those matters. But you never know. We might do an episode on narcissism and sociopathy. The other thing that I took away from a conversation with a friend who's did a lot of years in special operations and the intelligence community said, it's if you look at somebody's past, at some point you will come to understand some pretty good reasons as to why they became who they are. But you have to draw his words, the red line someplace. And what he was referring to was the fact that certain people, at least in the eyes of certain communities, deserve to be eliminated as a consequence of their actions, right? Regardless of what drove them to those actions. So that it gets right down to the line between nature, nurture, neuroscience, and the law and justice. Complicated beings. I can think of a number of people that I would love to hear you interview. And here I'm not revealing the reasons why, but except for the fact that I think he would be uniquely suited to bring out the important components of the conversation that other people have not been able to do, which, for instance, Liz Holmes. This is one of the most mysterious and yet disliked people on the planet. She's sort of synonymous with deception. I don't know if there have been any real interviews of her since the whole thing. I haven't followed that case. I listened to the book, and I followed it a little bit because it was happening in my hometown. Right, Theranos was right up the road. The building's still there. It's interesting. It's some of the most premier real estate in Silicon Valley, but nobody wants it. I feel like it's very hard to sell a home where somebody committed suicide or committed a murder. It's a beautiful home. And so I feel like the Theranos building was that building. So that would be a really interesting interview. I would love to hear that.
One of the most interesting dark human beings in science.
Yeah, and then there will even be people that say, was it even science, right? It might have all been deception. It might have been one part deception, one part goal setting mixed in with clearly that there were so many factors impacting what happened. I think the big difference between Theranos and that story and some of the other stories about Silicon Valley where people promised a lot more than they could deliver is they were promising things that were directly related to health and healthcare. People were taking blood tests with the understanding that the data they were getting was important information on sexually transmitted diseases and other diseases and making real world decisions on the basis of that. Whereas if you remember when the iPhone first came out and Steve Jobs was still alive and the phones were dropping calls if you held it in a particular way, and his response was a little flick. He said, "Hey folks, it's a phone," as if like don't get so worked up. But people held him understandably to a very high standard. She would sort of, it seemed, and I don't know, it seemed like she sort of adopted this idea that you could get it wrong a bunch of times before you get it right, except if the allegations are true, and I think she was found guilty, I believe, on a number of counts. Yet a number of the things that they were doing were impacting real world decision making. So Steve's point about the phone is just the phone, Well, it depends on the call. If you're calling 911, then it's not just the phone, right? But in the case of blood tests and disease, that's serious. I think that the Theranos case was super interesting because of the number of people from major universities and from government that both trusted her and the number of people who did not trust her and yet either didn't speak up or no one listened to them. It was only in the forensic version of it that everyone said, oh yeah, I knew that she was lying, et cetera, they were lying. There are multiple people involved in those lies, apparently. But I have a deep interest in the neuroscience of narcissism, sociopathy, and some of the darker aspects of the mind. So yeah, maybe someday. Well, maybe we'll do a podcast together. Yeah, I mean, like in the kind of early '90s version of talk show, where we darken the lights. Yeah, we do it together. You can use your voice because your voice is much more sinister sound.
Good cop, bad cop. Well, it'd be interesting from a scientific perspective. Somebody who is a sociopath or a psychopath, how to reveal something real about that. I think that requires not just, well, I don't know what that requires. It requires the same skill that it takes to be a good therapist.
Right, and some therapists won't work with sociopaths because they don't feel any progress can be made. Some therapists will work with sociopaths because for the wealthy ones, they're often they want their money. I think most therapists are good and benevolent, but there's some that will do it just the same way lawyers will work with criminals when they're criminals, right? Because there are certain domains of psychiatry that are more tractable than others, right? Borderlines are interesting, actually, just to mention, because they have this phenomenon of splitting. So in the world of psychology, the idea is that being neurotic is actually the goal. The idea that you could be, feel something and then work a lot to overcome it, or have some sort of defense mechanism in place, but that's not destructive. That's actually a pretty healthy state to be in. It's provided it's not destructive. Psychotic is truly delusional thinking about reality, and the idea is that borderlines intermittently split between psychotic and neurotic. That's why it's called this beautiful work by Melanie Klein that describes this, which I'm just now kind of delving into. But, so the borderline is the person who is like, I love you, I love you, I love you, and then truly feels as if they hate you and you become the bad object. Borderlines are because of the split, right? Schizophrenics are challenged because of the detachment from reality. And narcissists are challenging because they're often so charming that even the therapists are charming.
I believe you mentioned Carl. That's we'll talk
He's
about
definitely not a narcissist. He's one of the more humble people, but he is brilliant.
Thanks again to you. You've connected us. I had the pleasure of having a conversation with him. You had a conversation with him. I really enjoyed it on the podcast. You guys come from the same size, from the same place, maybe different journeys.
Fascinating. And levels. We were postdocs together. Carl is truly the Michael Jordan, the Wayne Gretzky, 5 children, amazing marriage to it. Also an amazing scientist. His wife, Michelle Monge, is in our neurology department at Stanford. Incredible thinker, writer, very kind person, humble. Speaking of getting into state, sorry, Carl, I'm going to out you on this, but Carl, despite being at the highest levels of science and engineering and the practice of psychology, his office is literally a coat closet with a small table. When you meet with Carl, if you manage to meet with him, because it's very hard to get to, you walk in, you sit down as if you're going through some interrogation, some spy novel, and he'll ask you, what are you most excited about lately? And I've got 11 minutes or something. And that's a meeting with Carl, because he's that busy. But he doesn't have the office with the pictures of the kids and the thing and all that. All that is kept elsewhere. So in order to I asked him, why do you work in this office, right? You work on light and channels of light, things related to light, of all things. Here you are in this dark room. He said, well, this is what gets me into the state of mind, be able to do what I want to do. Very Rick Rubin-ish. Not at all the same person, but very similar in that he's figured out the physical space he needs in order to get into the optimal state to do the work he needs to do in his lifetime. And it's very unusual, right? If I don't have a window, I kind of freak out. I can do it here for a while, or in this black cube here, floating in space, of course. But I find that amazing that these people that are operating at this super high level are willing to actually deprive themselves of a lot of conditions They're not sitting there with the secretary coming in offering them espresso every 5 minutes. No. That's New York neuroscience. The New York neuroscience mafia is kind of famous for having all the tickets to the opera and this and that, and they enjoy lifestyle.
The New York neuroscience.
Oh, there is one. There definitely is one. They know who they are. They know who they are.
For people who don't know, Andrew Huberman is from the West Coast, and now he's just starting wars with the neuroscience mafia.
They do amazing science. They love their lifestyle, and that's wonderful. But the culture is very different. Carl, and I think Silicon Valley in general kind of prides itself on this kind of monk-like asceticism, right?
So at the individual scale, be deliberate about controlling the environment. I think about that with conversations too. I haven't been deliberate about that either, in terms of controlling the space you're in. Visually, yes, black curtains, all those kinds of things.
There's nothing like the Let's Freaking podcast studio. First of all, when you do them remotely, I always feel like I'm in a witness relocation program. You only get the coordinates at the last moment, and you always get the sense that there are people behind the walls that are recording things.
But there's something about creating a feeling. I have a sense that there's a robot up there. There's several throughout this place, and I think part of creating a feeling would be having the robots constantly moving around and having a mind of their own, because that would most closely put guests and other humans that I interact with into a place that's closest to my mind, because it's such an engineering mind. It's one where things come to life, or whatever that is. That could be like art, new robots, or art. So I'm thinking about that both for me and for guests. And I'm also thinking about the difficult guests. Just to return to, you said Elizabeth Holmes. One person, maybe a couple of things I want to say. So one person I think I would like to talk to is Ghislaine Maxwell.
I would get afraid right before you reveal these kinds of things, and now I know why I get afraid. Yeah, I mean, again, assuming that she did the things that people claim she did, they're despicable, right? I mean, these were underage children. Right? There's just no version of the story where she did the things she was accused of doing and is still a quote-unquote good person. There's just, in my mind, right? And yet, I think there is tremendous interest in understanding that it doesn't do all that. So at least for some people.
Let me say a couple of things. So one is, at a high level, let me say that she believes, or her current story is that she's the victim of who? Of Jeffrey Epstein. I think I'll just leave that there. So these are ideas that you're facing. The nature of truth and the nature of the human mind is what it is. And this is, imagine, folks, if you went into a room, the person that says that, what do you do next? Let me also say that I never, or rarely, I rarely mention names that I'm interested in talking to without having made significant progress in already securing that interview. So people sometimes ask me about Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. I do not bring them up lightly in terms of there being a path of actual conversation. That said, something I regret, but I'm not sure I know what to do with it. But in the case of all the people I just mentioned, I haven't been preparing for those conversations. I only start really preparing seriously when it's confirmed, because it's such a heavy burden. And one of the things I regret having mentioned a conversation with Vladimir Putin before the war in Ukraine broke out in the past few years is that I would mention it very loosely, very casually, and without having really deeply put myself into a place that I'm ready to talk to him. And that's a tricky thing, because then the internet, the audience in general, and just me, when I listen back to it, dumb self. Think, well, why are you speaking so lightly about these topics?
Well, I know you've had a long-standing interest in talking to him. I think now, I don't understand how I would sit down and have a conversation with somebody like that, but that's not in the range of my skill sets, right?
Or like maybe not in the range of things that you're drawn to somehow.
Not so much. I mean, I watched that episode with great interest. Well, you did an episode recently with this guy who was a former cyber criminal turned stateside, right? I think he's recovering now. And there was a segment in there. Remind me his name.
Brett Johnson.
Brett Johnson. There was a segment in there where he talked about stealing a lifetime's worth of collected coins from some elderly woman, and this was everything she had. And then he openly admitted that he felt no remorse, which is the way he described it, is purely sociopathic. And then, of course, we learned that he grew up in a family where criminal behavior was very common. It was kind of embedded in his notions of what typical behaviors were. And I found myself somewhat conflicted, but also hung up on this idea that he was, he had behaved as a sociopath, or in a sociopathic way. And it created an internal conflict because he's a quite charming guest and his stories are terrific. Especially, I really enjoyed his discussions about how he would go out and do all these things out of a desire to please his girlfriend. So he was in service to other people despite being a sociopath. You could say he was in service to them as a way to extract. It's very complicated. I think that's the reason I went into science, is that at some level, it's more about facts than it is opinions and judgments. And I don't know that I have the ability to suspend judgment away from the kind of top level contours of my initial reactions were like, if it's true, like the Ghislaine Maxwell's and the Liz Holmes and the other sociopaths, is one of just kind of revulsion and repulsion. But that could also reflect the fact that I'm not as neurologically sophisticated as somebody that can spin all the plates of empathy, forgiveness, but also holding people accountable at the same time. That's work. That takes, if you think about it, that's 3-4 brain circuits having to work in parallel. That's the difference between chess or a game of Go and a game of chess.
No, so one is actually holding in your mind, and two is the raw skill of conversation. You're very, I've been listening to you, really very good conversation. But the skill of conversation is really tricky. I'm not being self-deprecating. I'm being just objective. I'm not good at conversation. I'm working very hard and getting better at it. I'm speaking not about just podcasting. I'm speaking just normal life. I have anxiety from social interaction.
Do you really?
A huge amount.
So this is interesting because I never detect that, ever. And I think there are people that we both know that have said to me that they too feel anxious, and yet your voice is steady. I don't see any perspiration.
Oh, yeah.
You appear
scared shitless. I was scared shitless with Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin is, when you first meet him, is intimidatingly calm. But as you get to know him a bit, you realize that the kindness and the generosity that you sense is real. But yeah, I would never in a million years have guessed that you get anxious in conversation.
Can I just make another quick comment? This may come off entertaining to you, and maybe you've already gotten the same. But having mentioned Vladimir Putin, Vladimir Zelensky, Ghislaine Maxwell, there's a natural question. How does Lex have access to these people? Who does he work for? Like, how is he...
Like, who works for him?
Or who works for him? What does he have on others? I ask myself, when I look in the mirror, just somebody who kind of enjoys conspiracy theories, and I want to ask the same question, like, well, I usually ask in the following way, like, how the fuck am I so lucky? Like, who am I a robot being controlled by somebody else? Or how is this my life right now? What is happening? It really does feel like a simulation. So let me just speak to several things. First of all, I have no boss. I know of, nor am I controlled by any intelligence agencies of any nation.
We're gonna get you a dog.
I can talk to. I'm scared of getting a dog so fond of so deeply. I think that
Next time I'm just gonna bring a puppy. I'm gonna leave you in.
I man, and then you'll never see me again. I mean, I love dogs so much, but I was also surprised. Maybe I have never talked to an intelligence, which is very interesting to me. Like
That you're aware of, because they're very good at communicating the right way.
but I've been very suspicious on this exact point. That's the downside of kind of being an introvert, having anxiety about social interaction, but then having so much love thrown your way because you connect over podcasts. Podcasts have a powerful way of connecting people. So people come with you love that I really love, I appreciate, but I wonder, like, exactly this question, like, why is this person with a Russian accent talking to me and showing me so much love?
Well, because sorry to interrupt you again, but it's what we do, and it's a sign of interest. By the way. Sometimes, yeah. I have a colleague at Stanford, and she said, interruption. 75% of the time is a sign of real interest in what the person is saying, if nothing else. Well, you're very loving.
Well, but
I mean, I learned about hedgehog and the frog food. When I learned, you're very loving. People love you because you're loving.
I love love. Okay, so 100%, and it's, I mean, especially here in Austin, Texas, people are so amazing. I go just hugs and just I love people.
But do you want a family? Are you eventually?
100%. I mean, I take what you said as a challenge in terms of having a family with kids, and they do jiu-jitsu and obviously defeat you and make you miserable for your failures as a father because you couldn't.
You're gonna be a great dad.
Build up an army of good jiu-jitsu people. But yes, I would love a family. I would love to have children. But I just want to finish that point. I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about the way people perceive what you're seeing as a Forrest Gump type character. Like who I am, I seem to be, and this is how like the world seems to work. Is you try to be yourself, like you try to find yourself. Maybe the better way to say it, and just be that. Be kind to people. Work your ass off, and say F you to anybody that wants to control you or to tell you what to do. Just be free and then put love out there in the world and doors open. This karma thing seems to work. Like how the hell, my friends, do you not? How the hell did I get a chance to eat barbecue with Rick Rubin, right? Like doors.
You guys have barbecue.
Right.
And he's from New York. Any New Yorker that I know has very high standards for food because bad restaurants don't last long in New York.
And barbecue counts as
Oh yeah.
Texas barbecue.
Well, I would also add that whether or not you realize it or not, you took tremendous risk. I mean, we come from the same original community, which is academic science, right? And to be at MIT and to start posting lectures online is risky, right? I was third or fourth man in terms of podcasting as an academic because you had gone on Rogan many times. David Sinclair had gone on there. Especially before the pandemic, you just didn't see many academics and scientists talking in a public-facing way. So you took tremendous risk, right? You took tremendous risk always wearing that jacket and tie, right? The only time I haven't seen you in that truly is when we rolled jiu-jitsu, and here I'm being generous to myself saying it rolled jiu-jitsu, basically you choked me out in front of hundreds of thousands. It was great fun, and I
Thank you for doing that. To have a beginner's mind is beautiful.
admittedly, I have not been taking the classes, but I'm going to. I truly am. Especially there's a small chance I'm going to find myself in Austin a bit more often in the near future. But
Well, if you're out in San Francisco, you should train with Mark Zuckerberg. He just started, so
oh yeah,
you guys get Uh,
Sure.
I mean, he's actually, so people listen to an episode, perhaps, is a fascinating human being.
Listen to it. It's great. You took tremendous risk as an academic to do what you did. So I do believe that when one takes intelligent risk, because you can die, you crash your career, you can do all sorts of self-destructive or destructive things when you take risks. You took risks and they paid off, right? And you take different risks at different stages. But I I don't throw around the word admiration lightly. I mean, I admire that you were in this classroom at MIT. Like, I'm going to film this and put it online. One of your early interviews is with Ido Portal, who's very hard to get to. I've communicated with Ido a few
You
times.
should definitely talk to him.
I can't wait to talk to him. I'm dying to talk to him. I was supposed to do some course teaching with him right before the pandemic hit, and then it got canceled because he couldn't travel. But getting to him is exceedingly challenging. So you do have this incredible ability to get to people and for them to trust you and know you. And I think it's through your authenticity. And I think it's the fact that you're willing to go places where people haven't been before. You know, this is what's the saying about the pioneers? How do you spot the pioneers? They're the people with the arrows in their backs. You know, so that's the, you know, yeah, and that's actually a quote that I lifted from Terry Signowski, who's a,
There you go.
you know,
Sources again.
Terry's you should talk to Terry. He's a computational neuroscientist down at the Salk Institute, Howard Hughes investigator, etc. But so you know, taking risks that other people have not taken that's a real thing, and to do it with integrity and rigor, that's a real thing. And so, yeah, I'm complimenting you, and I hope it lands and lands deeply. But I also hope that people will hear that and understand that it's one thing to do what other people are already doing boldly. It's a whole other thing to launch an entire art form or venue, and you did that. And you didn't write a book. Hopefully you will someday. You didn't go write a book. A lot of academics have written books. You went online. Jordan Peterson, another controversial character. He did it too. All those lectures that he did, and then he led to this other thing. So, you know, there's karma, and then there's also having the spine to just put it all on the line and do something for which there is no prior example to hold on to while you go through those headwinds.
It's a really fascinating thing that actually a lot of people tell me about you and your career. Like, the reach of a podcast is really fascinating. It's not the numbers of people listen. I don't know if that's important at all. What's important is like the depth of connection you have with certain people. It really moves them. And like they really get you. There's a lot of big Andrew Huberman fans that really get you. It's not just the science, it's the stuff between the lines. It's Costello. It's the whole picture of a scientist that finds beauty in biology and reveals it. And they love you for it.
You know, because it was on television at the time, I followed that Amanda Knox story pretty carefully. And I don't watch television, but whenever I would travel, if there was a TV on the airplane, I would find myself getting wrapped into things like Locked Up Abroad. You know, and these things where which make you terrified to travel anywhere, let alone commit a crime overseas. You know, the scenes of some of these prisons are so dramatic. You know, I mean, her case got a ton of interest, and then she went and then was a student at the University of Washington, and has talked quite openly about how she was treated and how people assume guilt, and eventually she was exonerated, and we can only go by what we know, what the law determined. But these are people that the world is fascinated by. I'm guessing about a third of people have already decided this person is despicable. Why would you ever give them an audience? About a third of people, I think, are open to, or at least interested in learning more about them. And then I think the remaining third, kind of the category that I put myself in, which is what can I learn about people and myself, even in my revulsion, right? What can I learn? What can I learn about myself from listening to this conversation with somebody that I like to think? I'm not talking about Amanda here. I'm talking about the other people you're talking about that I can't relate to. Like hearing conversations with and about people that you cannot relate to is informative. Otherwise, your whole mind literally becomes instant.
Well, there's an interesting thing I also have to ever since the war in Ukraine broke out, one of the questions I was asking myself, and this is not to be dramatic, it's just a very simple, honest question that I think a lot of journalists that operate in the war zone or documentary filmmakers that I've recently got a chance to meet have to be honest with themselves. Are you willing to put at risk your life for things you do?
And what are you willing to die for?
Yeah, what are you willing to die for? It sounds very dramatic, but whenever risk goes up, I mean, I don't know. You asked that if you want to take out a trip out to space on a commercial space flight. You have to. Are you willing? Are you willing to die for this journey? Now the odds there are really small.
I just watched Apollo 13 again.
Yeah.
Great movie. I'm not going to space. I'm not going to space.
Afraid of heights?
No, I'm not afraid of heights. It feels like a terrible place to die.
Well, first of all, death anywhere is not great.
Yeah, although I have a song teed up in my phone. If the plane starts to go down,
Yeah,
I'm gonna spend the last one. It's a rare song. Nobody knows it. It's a song off a B track of my favorite band, which is Rancid. It's a song called "The Sentence," and nobody, and I love it, and I listen to it almost every day.
Rancid, the sentence is called.
The band is called Rancid.
Yeah.
Famous band.
Yeah.
It's great. Love those guys. Love their music. And the song is "The Sentence." You can only find it on a B-side or outtake. If you don't know how to decipher Tim Armstrong's voice, then you probably won't understand the lyrics. But because it sounds very, very fast. But if the plane ever goes, anytime there's turbulence, I put that in headphones and I'm like, well, it's time. I'm gonna go out like this. I don't want to drift off into the galaxy slowly. That sounds fine. Just like I wouldn't want to drown.
But on the plane is okay.
Well, on a plane, if it starts going down and there's truly nothing we can do, you might as well at least listen to your favorite song.
Yeah, sure. I'll probably go with the Pixies "Where's My Mind" from Fight Club. And just the calmness, just sit back, like the musicians playing at the Titanic.
I didn't know you were a Pixies fan. I'm gonna have to.
Not so much a Pixies fan, actually. I should say that that was the "Where's My Mind" was the chosen song for Fight Club at the end when the buildings are coming down or something like that. So that there's certain songs that it's just right for the collapse of human civilization, and you're calmly appreciating like that's just it. This is how circus life is. At any moment it can end, and this is it.
I love how we both have Death and Demise soundtracks.
It's just a question when you're an academic, it doesn't come up often.
Right.
That's all. That's
yeah. There are some academics that are bold and brave. It's not a phenotype. But being bold and brave in the physical world is not a common phenotype of academics. I mean, the great neurologist, one of my, I don't have many heroes, but Oliver Sacks is a true hero. I mean, people think of him as a writer, but he was foremost a neurologist, and he took tremendous pushback from the neurology community for doing his books and his articles. He has a great biography called On the Move. There's a wonderful documentary that just came out about him. He died in 2015. I'm actually kind of a collector of his things. But he had he was accused of horrible things until the movie Awakenings came out with De Niro and Robin Williams.
Amazing movie, by the way. People don't, they seem to not say great things about the movie. I love that.
It was amazing, and it was only once he became famous from that movie that his more academic work started to receive any kind of attention, and he was invited back to Columbia and NYU. Yeah, the New York Neuroscience Mafia is a real thing. And yes, you know who you are, and some of them are actually coming on the podcast. They are.
You're not. I think we talked offline about this. We should start a mafia to fight off whatever's going on in the East Coast. Although I'm still at MIT, so I don't know how that works. But Boston is different than New York.
Yeah, so I have tremendous respect for science done in New York. Don't get me wrong; they are excellent scientists. It's just a very different culture than all the rest of us. And the personalities.
Tremendous respect for the mob.
Well, and the personalities are a bit more grandiose. However, because of some of the shift in science culture in the last few years, things around scandals and things of that sort, they've been forced to tamp down some of their personality, or at least their outspoken personality. And I actually think it's revealed something really important and useful in science, which is, it used to be the case you could really inject your personality into what Richard Feynman is a good example. If he did today what he did then, bongo drumming on the Caltech naked, working out theorems in strip clubs and things like that, he would have lost his job in moments, right? So that kind of behavior isn't celebrated anymore. It's actually punished. And I'm only half kidding about this New York neuroscience mafia, but because I now exist in multiple realms, I can say these sorts of things. And again, admiration and respect, but I will say that I think it's important that people in science, that are kids that are curious about science, understand that you can have any personality, provided that you're ethical and respectful in science, and do well, right? There are true bench that just want to be at the bench. There are people that just want to be in an office. There are people that really enjoy public speaking. And there are people that love meetings, and there are people that hate crowds. And so there's a place for everybody, truly a place for everybody in science. I would like to be able to shine light on the fact that you can have a shy personality, an outgoing personality, and all of those can have excellent careers in science. But you have to find the community in place that's right for you. One reason I like Stanford is that Stanford is very much about the future. We have Nobel Prize winners, we have Fields Medal winners, and all that stuff. And their names are on walls, and we acknowledge their great works. But most of what we hear about in the halls of Stanford is about what's happening now and what could happen next. It's really about the future. Whereas when I spend time at other institutions, not to be named, you hear that, but there's a lot of kind of recycling and regurgitation of how wonderful people are based on things they did previously. And the students at Stanford, because of Silicon Valley, sure, they have respect for Nobel Prizes. They're delighted to be learning from and surrounded by all these great minds. But they're mostly interested in what they are going to create. And so I I really like the shift toward possibility as opposed to things that are steeped in tradition. I've never been to high table dinner at Oxford. I'm sure it's a wonderful experience. I'm also not sure what purpose it serves for the world. But I've never been, and so I don't know what the conversations are, and so maybe I'm speaking out of line. And then now I'm definitely not doing it.
No, you're definitely getting invited. But yeah, I'm with you because the culture is pick the right one for you. That's why I like MIT. The spirit of it. To me, it's not about the past or the future. It's about just tinkering and having fun, building cool stuff. Like the big ambitious projects, it's there. I mean, maybe more than the biology outside, but like the engineering side, it doesn't matter if this has an impact. Let us build the coolest thing the world has ever built.
Whenever I'm in Kendall Square, I've seen they have those buildings there that actually tilt toward the ground. The architecture of MIT is also impressive.
Yeah, he pulled up, Sergey just pulled up Elon Musk tweet. I'm inspired by curiosity. That is what drives me. Let us expand the scope and scale of consciousness so that we may aspire to understand the universe. There's like 3 tweets in one, but curiosity, yeah. Curiosity for its own sake.
What's that saying? I think Dorothy Parker said, the cure for boredom is curiosity. There's no cure for curiosity.
And we need to celebrate. So let me just briefly mention to my lovely friends at MIT to celebrate different weirdness, to celebrate weird characters. I sometimes get loving pressure from my lovely friends at MIT to tone down the weirdness a bit.
Really? Even from MIT?
I'm very fortunate to have a lot of leverage to where I have completely resist the pressure. But I'm very sure that there's young faculty that subtle pressure would
dissolve them into a play.
No.
They're from Boston. Excuse me.
From Boston. That's right.
They're tougher than that.
That's right. But it's a slight nudging towards conformity that I think ultimately destroys, or at least lessens the power of the kind of science that you can do when you encourage diversity. Diversity in all of its forms, including the weirdness of ideas, the out-of-the-box thinkers, including the flamboyant behavior online. Uh, how you choose to educate, how you choose to inspire. People talk about freedom of speech, but it's not just like freedom of speech to say controversial things. It's also freedom of speech to be weird. Like, if you're for some reason fascinated in, like, you look at Elon Musk, he talks about sex a lot. Let the guy put sex memes up. Who cares? Like,
I mean, I feel like Elon can do basically whatever he wants.
right? There's no pressure. But there's a bunch of Elons in the academic world. There's a bunch of Elon. Uh, no, actually, sorry. Let me backtrack because the man deserves props.
Right? He's unparalleled.
He's the CEO of major companies. You better believe there's pressure to behave more like a CEO as opposed to a giggling schoolboy who's posting memes throughout the night. But that is him, and that freedom. That's what freedom looks like. I talked to a lot of CEOs, and a lot of them feel like caged birds who have long ago forgotten how to sing. Quite honestly, like they there's like shareholders, and they come up with excuses for themselves. Here's why I have to be this way. You have to understand. So on. There's PR. There's marketing people. There's lawyers. There's all that kind of stuff. But the final result is the authenticity suffocated. The beautiful weirdness of a CEO, of a leader, of a creator, of a scientist, all that. Uh, that's all gone.
Well, Steve Jobs would have kept his job and acting the way he did in his 20s and 30s in today's economy. But he probably would have updated his protocols, so to
A little
speak.
bit, but maybe
He's screaming at employees. I mean, these are anecdotes, right? I call them anecdata because people treat them as data, but they're really just anecdotes. We don't know. I wasn't there. But I like the idea of authenticity without oversharing. Right? You're very authentic, but there are aspects to your life that I'm aware of that your audiences will never be aware of, and there are aspects of your life that I'll never be aware of. And so you're still authentic. But
yeah, which ones are you aware of? People are gonna wonder, like, what is
you think I'm
do
going
you have a sex dungeon? What is this?
But interesting choice of examples. No, but I think that people lose careers on the basis of the movement of their thumbs, right? I mean, the chair of psychiatry at Columbia recently lost his position based on a response to a tweet. This is one of the most famous psychiatry departments in the world, and he put something out there that was very insensitive, frankly. And everyone that I talked to about it was like, "Gosh, that was very, very insensitive, not thoughtful at all," and he lost his job, right? Or at least had to step down. I don't know the specifics. So, I think I read someplace that more than half of the job loss due to online behaviors because people were trying to be funny, right? I mean, not everyone can pull off what Tim Dillon. Oh, and by the way, congratulations! I heard that you and Tim just got married. Yeah,
No, we didn't just get married. He proposed.
Yeah, got it.
And I said yes.
Right. So some people can get away.
Yeah. Thank you, Sergey. Has that
He
ready
has
to go.
13.3 thousand likes. One of those is.
So for people who are not aware, one of the days in April tweeted that Tim Dillon asked me to get married, and I said yes. I think Tim said that the wedding will be on 6th Street in Austin. Bring all of your weapons, which of course is totally inappropriate. I was funny. I was like.
Wow, yeah, you broke tradition with the jacket. So it sounds to me that you are a free speech absolutist.
I think freedom is really important, and that includes letting people who are hateful, letting people who are controversial have a voice on platforms. But it becomes, I'm not sure what exactly to think because I also treasure the quiet voices in the back of the group. And sometimes the assholes silence those voices, meaning by being loud and obnoxious and so on. It pushes, like you should be able to let people kind of build a community that's positive, that's loving, or that's constantly trolling, or that's super hateful. All those communities should have a place in the world. But like the thing I've noticed is that hate can destroy a community full of hate can destroy a community full of love easier than a community full of love can overtake one of hate. So you have to kind of, I don't know exactly how, but create digital mechanisms that discourage the collision of these communities. They should all have a platform and ability to speak to a large audience, but you have to be careful to protect that like little flame uh, of connection that people have.
That's good. The goodness, it sounds like. I mean, yeah, I think in any great city like New York, which I love, by the way, you want to have a symphony and an opera house, and you want some punk rock shows happening on the Lower East Side. You want all of that. You just don't necessarily want them to overlap. In terms of social media, and podcasts and engagement, one thing that I decided very early on was to encourage comments and feedback, etc. But I have in my mind what I call classroom rules. You've taught in the university, and then you teach in the university, and you establish a certain etiquette within the classroom of the kinds of questions. Right? So there's always the student that's going to ask a question, which is basically a 10-minute monologue about their experience that really isn't a question that pertains to a lot of people. So you politely discourage that kind of question, and you encourage the kinds of questions that are likely to be the minds of many other students. It's just more efficient that way.
Or not polite.
Or, I try and respond to comments, and I try and respond, but also, there's this really interesting question now. If you block people or restrict people, people think that you're somehow afraid of the information that they're posting, but that's often not the case. I'm not in the habit of blocking or restricting too many people. Occasionally, I've had to do it only because of how other people are being treated. What I can take and what I think other people deserve to take are two completely different things. David Goggins, right? I don't know if he still does this, but a few years ago he posted something like, if people ask him, when do you sleep, he would just block them. I guess it wasn't consistent with what he was trying to say, of course, but he's trying to get a message out. I think people should just understand that everybody's page is their own to monitor, right? Just like in a classroom, there are certain rules, of course, of the institution, but then you establish the etiquette within the context of the kind of class. A class about personality psychology or the psychology of love, you're going to have a very different range of conversations than a class on men learning physiology. So I think social media is a great place for conversation, but it's not necessarily a great place for every kind of conversation.
Yeah, and I also just say people that do get blocked, this is something I do very deliberately, blocked or ignored. I never think poorly of them. I actually explicitly think if there's somebody that's like saying hateful things about me or whatever, I always think positive thoughts. It's nothing kind of weird to do with it. But just actually found that as a hack. I think well of them, and that allows me to never think of them again. Like I send them my love, and like I think this is a fascinating human being with a fascinating story. I would love to have time to actually learn about their story, but there's not enough time in the world. And I just think well of them, and then I move on and enjoy a delicious meal with people that are close to me and I love, and so on. It's just I move on, and then never adding to the negativity of like, just even in the privacy of my own mind, thinking a hateful thought towards them. It serves no purpose whatsoever.
I love that about you, and I know that what you just said is true. One of the, I think, more toxic things in life is what's called evacuative projection. When people feel something and they try to evacuate it and project it onto something else. Projection is fascinating, right? What you essentially just said is that you don't accept projections. In fact, you transmute them, to put in the language of the Buddhists. You transmute it into positivity, and in that way, you truly neutralize it and transmute it. I think that if people were better understood when they were experiencing or observing evacuative projection, the world would be healthier. But it requires a certain stable internal rudder, and when we're tired or sick or angry, or hungry, excessively hungry, all of us are less good at it. I've been positively struck by the nature of most of the interactions, not just feedback, but my favorite thing as an educator in the classroom, but also on social media, my absolute favorite thing is when the comments about other people's comments are positively reinforcing. So you see people having conversations within the comments, and you realize this is like, if you, as an educator, then it's fun to teach, it's fun to talk to the students, but the real pleasure is walking by a small group of students on campus and hearing them talking about the material. That just fills me with joy. And because what it means is that the ideas are reverberating in their nervous systems and will eventually make out to others. So it's not just about feedback, it's about a venue for parsing information.
So you actually posted that we're going to talk on Instagram, and I collected a bunch of questions, which reminds me of, I have to mention Mike Jones and a question he asked, but also a gift he gave quite a while ago, if it's okay. But first, Beth.
Yes.
We're looking at an Instagram page of Mike Jones Knife and Tool. You should check it out. Andrew gave me a gift from him that is a badass butcher knife. Yours is the earth. ... is from If by Electric Kipling.
Yeah, the story of this knife is kind of interesting, perhaps, for people where I was coming out here to Austin with Lex, and it was his birthday. I wanted to get him a gift, but I didn't know what to get him. And I contacted this guy, Mike Jones, that I learned about through Joe Rogan. Because remember in the old days of Joe Rogan, when you go on the episode afterwards, you take a picture with an object. So it's like you walk with a flamethrower, or people would have the axe. I picked up this bushwhacker hatchet thing, and I love this thing. And Joe said, "Oh yeah, you should check out Mike Jones's work. He does these beautiful knives." So then I heard your episode with Joe, and you recited a poem at the end. It was right after your grandmother died, and there's a line in that poem from If that Mike engraved on that knife for you. So he makes these by hand. I love the old days. Before the podcast,
That's your first appearance.
That was the first time on there, and it was a lot of fun. The old studio in Los Angeles, and yeah, Mike makes these beautiful knives, and I just have a great admiration for crafts people. So, do you use it? Do you cut your 1 meal a day steaks?
I feel
You taking it with you on the travels?
exactly. I actually used to keep it on the table, but I thought it was really intimidating guests. But like,
You put it on their side.
Yeah,
right.
It's like, oops.
It's trust, right?
What's the story? I mean, yeah. But it's because it's not. It's quite badass, if I may say. But the craftsmanship is obvious, but also easy.
It's got some like texture,
yeah.
It looks like it's designed to cleave through a win.
If I had like a family or something where there's nothing about this place that softens your kind of sense that this person might not murder.
Let's put it differently. This place could use a lemon touch.
That's one way to put it. If it's okay, let me, because it is a poem I go to often, actually. You mentioned reciting some lyrics, and I'm going to go back to that at some point. You get a few songs that touch you. But this is one of the things I go to often. I'll read it to remind myself. It's advice from father to son, and it's a kind of mantra that it's just nice to remind myself. Okay, let me just use this opportunity to one more time read it by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, of being lied about, don't deal in lies, of being hated, don't give way to hate, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those two imposters just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by maze to make a trap for fools, or watch the thing gave you a life too broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings, and risk it all on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose, start again in your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and sinew to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on, and there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, and walk with kings that lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, all men count with you, but none too much. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, to be a man, my son. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mike, for that. That's it. It's and engraved in it. Yeah, it's, yours is the earth, everything that's in it. We toiled over what to engrave, and then finally I just said, Mike, just pick something that speaks to you. You're the craftsman, so he selected it. There's certain ways to pull yourself in that book. Actually, Carl Dasdorf, that's TV, vertical projection. One of my favorite. First of all, just as you said, incredible writer. Just, I mean, if you wrote fiction, if you wrote those kinds of things, I'm curious to see where he goes with writing. Very interesting. I think that book took him 10 years to write, which is vindication for me and for you, because we both supposed to write books if we haven't done it. Yeah, I mean, in some sense, your first book will have, decades in it, right? Even if you just take half a year to write it. It's like the first book, like the first album for a musician. I mean, it's a life, it's a journey. But he uses poems and quotes in there really well. It's a beautiful book. It's a dreamy book. I think when people hear that it's a book about neuroscience, they think they're going to get a textbook or a protocols book or something. It's nothing like that. But it really is a deep dive into the mind of the psychiatrist and the researcher. So much feeling and compassion. I love that you love poetry. I didn't know that until I saw you on the road and read If. And I'm not a very avid consumer of poetry, but I'm a big Wendell Berry fan. And I try and read a poem once every few days. Also, I think If is a tough act to follow.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the richness and like you said, every third line in there is something you consider your life well lived if you said that. What about the preparation for the solo podcast? You said you listen to certain songs. You sing or recite lyrics to certain songs. Is there ones that kind of come to mind that are interesting?
Yeah, I've always been very lyrics driven, and I don't understand music. I talked to Rick about this, and I talked to you about this, but I don't really understand. I mean, I can hear music and like it, but I don't really understand the structure of it. The lyrics make a lot of sense.
But does it touch your soul, music, or is it the lyrics?
It's the lyrics. It's not the instrumentals. So I'm a huge Joe Strummer fan, and I'm going to lose points for saying this, but I'm not a Clash fan.
Oh.
And so he obviously is best known for the Clash. Most Clash songs start off great, and then after about 30 seconds, at least in my mind, just kind of disintegrate into a bunch of mush. Whereas Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros, which is what he did as an adult, or as later, and some of his solo work, Rick produced some work that he did with Johnny Cash. Rick pulled Johnny Cash essentially out of retirement and had a blues albums before he died. And so anything that Strummer did, there's a favorite song of mine by Strummer. It's called Burning Lights. You can find it. There is an album now where you can find it with Tennessee Rain or some of these things that he did, which are a little bit more folky, so not really punk. So I love that song. A bunch of songs by Rancid that I love. And then if I listen to instrumentals, I do. I'll listen to classical piano.
Some dreams are made for children.
Well, it's not going to sound good as a poem. Like doing things. So, yeah. So I mean, because it has to be something. Joe's voice is what makes it. Joe's voice. But yeah, that song "Burning Lights" from I hired a contract killer.
I don't know, the lyrics are pretty good.
They're pretty good. I mean, Joe is an amazing writer, right? I'm also a big Bob Dylan fan. Glenn Gould for classical piano. He was at Asperger's, and actually I think you can hear him grunting. He had a Tourette's like tic. And I learned about Glenn Gould from Oliver Sacks. So I'll listen to any number of things. It depends on my mood. If I'm feeling a little more tired and I need to be amped up, I'll listen to something that's a little louder and faster. If I'm feeling kind of keyed up and I need to bring the cadence down a little bit, then I'll listen to something a little mellower, poppier. I love bands like, I'm a big fan of this British pop band called James. There's like 20 bands named James, but this one, and again, I lose 1 point for saying that, but they're amazing. And that's
I think you've accumulated enough points where you can afford to lose a few.
Yeah. But in any case, music and poetry they're the subconscious, right? I mean, if you think about a Bob Dylan song or a really good Strummer song or a poem, the words don't mean anything when read linearly, but they make you feel something. They're tapping into the subconscious. That's really what they're doing. They're pulling on neural threads of emotion based on either timbre or cadence or something that's independent of the word structure. And that to me is the beauty.
I often say Johnny Cash's version "Hurt." That I say would be my favorite song ever.
We did a 9 Inch Nails song.
He did.
I think Rick produced that. I'm pretty sure
he produced it, and he did Rick produced he pulled Johnny Cash out from a dark place to produce something that, when you look back, is one of the great things ever in music, which are these haunting covers of certain songs, originals.
Johnny Cash and Joe Strummer did a version of Redemption song together that Rick produced, which is on loop in my house sometimes, for hours and hours.
That song is fascinating. Bob Marley song,
sung by Johnny Cash and Joe Strummer. Sometimes I think what it would be to be a fly on the wall when these guys were doing
these songs of freedom. There's certain songs where you're like, it elicit an emotion that's unlike anything else. I mean, I was trying to figure that out with Rick too. Like, there's certain songs that make you want to pull up over to the side of the road and just weep or just get inspired to just get shit done and all those kinds of things. Remember your family, the people you've lost, all that kind of stuff. And you hurt. I hurt myself today to see if I still feel.
There's certain songs that I've loved so much that I actually won't play them during a relationship until the relationship passes a certain duration, because if you start sharing in those experiences with somebody and it starts to become associated with the relationship, you braiding it in with the dopamine of love, and that relationship ends, the song is forever tainted. There are certain songs that I will never play. They're mine. I just have, it's too risky to give those up. And I think that
there's like levels.
There are levels, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this kind of preparing for the solo episode, just interacting with Rick about that process of preparation, and because you mentioned the interviews, whether you do solo, are you the only one in the room, or
no? It used to be Rob, my producer, who I should say, he's really the person behind the podcast. I mean, first of all, we're equal partners.
You're just a pretty face.
We're just, and I'm aging. I actually really, I like aging. It's weird. A lot of people get friends with David Sinclair, and it's all about not aging. I don't want to live past 90. I'm just trying to get as much done as I can in a short life and do it right, with integrity, heart, and accuracy. You know,
And you like the stages.
oh yeah. If you read Erickson's stages of development, you realize that every stage of life is a set of neural circuits trying to resolve a problem. And if you're going to try and avoid that progression, sure, you might live longer, but it's sort of like saying, like, do you want to go win the high school jiu-jitsu championship? No, you graduated high school a long time ago, right? So I actually look forward to the future, even if it means that I'm starting to shift. I think that my biology will shift. I'll fight that. I try to take care of myself, but I don't want to get sick. I don't want to suffer. Who does? But I'm embracing this whole developmental arc. I mean, we're not children and then adults. Our entire life is one long developmental arc. And if you fail to embrace that, you fail to extract the richness of what it is to be a human being. So, in any event, I record. Rob is in the room. I'll sometimes stop and ask him for feedback if I feel like something's not landing right. So if it's clear, he'll let me know. If it's not clear, he'll let me know. Excuse me. And then, Costello used to be in the early days of the podcast, which wasn't that long ago. He's snoring at my feet and farting and smelling up the room, and we're all just kind of like gasping for air. He's a bulldog. That's what I do. With him gone, it changed. The whole thing changed. There will be another dog soon. And as you know, I've been moving through that grief process, but having him there gave me a levity that I miss. But in my mind, he's still there. Yeah, he's still there. So, and in time there'll be another dog, and who knows? Maybe there'll be a dog and a couple of infants running around, but that would be more distracting. So, but there's no podcast that exists just because of the podcast. This is true for Joe. This is true for your podcast. It's not just a staff of people that post stuff. That's just the top level culture. There's the constant feedback and iteration of what you want it to become, and trying to hold on to something that's essential. Because everything has to evolve, but you can't lose the essence of something. Anytime a company or brand or a course or a scientist has done that, it just ends up terrible. It just becomes like a centaur version of itself.
So to Rick is the power of the people in the room is great to inspire and to destroy. So you have to be extremely careful with the selection of people that are in the room. To me, I never really thought of it that way. I thought that only positive things could happen.
Oh, by adding people. Oh, I think if there were an audience there, well, you know what? Someday I'd love to do a live podcast with you.
I saw you doing like a couple of live things, which is great. You're paving the way there.
Well, we did one. I went up to the University of British Columbia. Yeah, and did a lecture on a college campus, and one of the more gratifying things that happens is this kid, so it's over the 20s, I think, stood up and said, I've never been on a college campus. I didn't think I could go to a college campus. And that I still rings in my mind, whoever you are out there, that meant so much to me. Because I was like, yes. There was something about that to me. I was like, okay, it made sense to come all the way up here and do this in person. Because you can get out to a lot more people. Public speaking events, it's not like it's that lucrative or anything. I mean, unless you're a famous celebrity or politician or something. I'm sure there are people that do well with it, but that's not what it's about for us. It's really about being able to connect with people in a different venue and for interactions like that. I don't know how many of them we will do, but I'm curious to see how it goes. But I'd love to do a podcast with you.
Is it energizing? My fear is the fear of the introvert. Is that I don't know if I can handle so much love and fascinating people all around. It's like, I don't know.
Well, we'll invite a few haters too.
But I love the haters too. But I don't know. It makes me nervous because Jordan Peterson's currently on tour. I got a chance to hang out with him.
Oh, right. He does a lot of live.
Yeah, he's not on tour where he does like that.
But he doesn't have any small kids. So no. Yeah. So yeah, you should do it before.
It's also exhausting. I mean, I'm just speaking from an athlete perspective. If you're Mick Jagger with an Rolling Stone, it's just physically I mean, you have to speak potentially for 2 hours, then off stage, like hanging out with people. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of hours to stay focused and to keep finding your place of like calmness and say.
Well, and you're staying in hotels, your circadian rhythm's disrupted. You're not getting your like cold and sauna and you work out every day. Your food isn't optimal. I think done in patches, I could enjoy it. It's fun to meet people from different places. I'm doing a public lecture in Copenhagen for the Lundbeck Foundation in June 3rd. And that one is particularly gratifying for me because the Lundbeck Foundation is an academic foundation. So the fact that, and so when they invited, I asked them, do you want me to talk about what the lab does, or do you want to talk about the stuff in the podcast? They're like, no, not your lab. We want to hear about this like health stuff, that stuff that we cover on the podcast. So that was amusing to me and tells me that, that things are changing now. I think 2020 and 2021 revealed a lot of things about people to ourselves. But one thing that it made very clear is that there's an enormous appetite for tools for mental and physical health, but also understanding about science and how science is done. So to you, and listening to Mr. Flattery, it's true gratitude. There's now a runway for scientists to talk to you. And you had I always forget this guy's name, the virus guy.
Vincent Recaniello.
Yeah, amazing, right? I mean, forgetting the controversy around all the stuff of 2020, 2021, I mean, he is an encyclopedia of all things virology.
Yeah, people should listen to his podcast, This Week in Virology. He's also an incredible lecturer and educator. It's fascinating. It's fascinating, yeah, when people take, again, that leap of putting all that education online. That's non-controversial at all. It's like everybody, people should go listen to him for the most part, in terms of, at his best at least. There's no politics in it. There's not.
No, he's a virus jockey. He likes playing around with bacteria and viruses.
But that said, we all
molecular biology.
We all say stuff carelessly all the time. So he gets a bit of trouble on some of the things he said about like dismissing lab leak theory. Like there's no way
He dismisses that.
Yeah, but he's not making like folks. There's a difference when you say stuff like off the cuff, and when you say stuff that's like core to your principles and you've thought about it for a very long time. You're talking for hundreds of hours, and you can just say stuff. You can just say your opinions. Will Smith slapped.
I was wondering. Okay, wait. How long were you recording? I was wondering how long it was going to take us before someone
talked about Ukraine.
No, Will Smith. I was wondering whether or not we missed it. I had it planned. I was literally in the back of my mind. I had it planned that at the end, if we didn't talk about the Will Smith, the Chris Rock thing, that I was going to say, it's amazing. This is the first conversation to happen in a long time where it wasn't mentioned. No,
not pull it up. No, we don't need.
Here we go. It revealed some interesting things about human beings' impulse control and lack thereof. But oh my goodness, Chris Rock has material for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I think he's not short on material. But I do. If I knew, I wanted to tweet. If I knew you're allowed to just slap me as my conversation with Tim Dillon, we would cooperate differently. People just being humans. There's so much fascinating human nature on display there. It's also in terms of it becoming a topic that a lot of people are talking about versus the war in Ukraine, for example, is also fascinating to watch. Like just these kind of news cycles moving through.
Well, I think if I may, sorry to interrupt, but anytime we observe something very limbic, very emotional, we generally can empathize somewhat, right? We all know what it's like to feel angry. We all know what it's like to feel ashamed. We all know what it's like to feel shocked. Images of war are, for most people, very hard to relate to. We see it. It's, there are these images, and they're very traumatic and challenging to look at times, and yet most people have no idea what it feels like to be shot at, or what it feels like to have your home destroyed, or what it feels like to be an aggressor in that way. So I think that people naturally orient towards things that feel familiar to them, even though the circumstances are different.
And people also forget, they look at these celebrities, it's just like looking at criticism of Will Smith, that you forget that they're human too. That's one of the most surprising things for me, having done this podcasts and met celebrities and stuff like that, they're humans. They're all human. And that's inspiring to me. Like some of these great folks that have won Nobel Prizes and built some cool things, they're just human, like the rest of us.
Well, and if you look at actors and actresses, I mean, there's some amazing ones, right, that who also do well in their outside life, but their careers were built on the business of pretending to be other people. And that's got to distort, maybe positively, but also just, let's be honest, what it is, that the neuroplasticity there, the changes in the areas of the brain that represent personality have to be quite different for somebody who pretends to be lots of different personalities and gets paid for it. You're working the reward system into the system of self-identity, and you know, you have to imagine that that can really contort somebody's neurology in ways that maybe they are not as, maybe they are not in touch with reality in the same way that we are. Remember, earlier we were talking about neurotic or psychotic. You know, they may be more borderline in their kind of ground state than we think. And so I'm actually impressed anytime there's a celebrity who doesn't have a messed up life. Yeah. I'm like, oh wow, you know, finally somebody who's managed to, you know, maintain some semblance, at least from the outside, of normalcy.
So first of all, I can empathize with the actions of most that did, right? They're not. I think they're kind of not kind of. They're just shitty. You should probably talk privately, man to man, not because otherwise it's like a traumatic display. It's almost like you are a fake act. You're acting.
Well, there are all these questions, right? I mean, obviously it was aggressive at some level. There's this question of whether or not it was impulsive. I think most people feel yes. There's a question, was the protective nature of it because he was doing it to, you know, apparently in defense. But then there's also the context. He lost touch with the context, right? Whereas Chris Rock basically gets, there's the possible critique that he went too far. That's going to be in the eye of the beholder. But then, depending on how you view comedy and jokes, but then there's also the fact that he took that slap and then just snapped right back, so much so that people thought maybe it was fake.
Yeah.
He also waited with his hands behind his back.
That's his nature. He likes to stand like that. I mean, I got to look at the story here to connect to what Chris Rock did. Like I wish what Chris Rock did in terms of taking his life and keep going. First of all, just props for somebody that's able to maintain cool in that situation for the most part. I think I watched it once.
You only have to be alive on this planet. Yeah, to see it. You can't avoid seeing it.
I wish at that afterwards he would sort of say something loving and kind to Will Smith and his wife, and then hit him real hard, lean into the joke.
Yeah, but there, I think in hockey they call taking a number. I have a friend who plays hockey, and there's this idea that, like, if someone checks you really badly in one game, you don't go and check them again. You don't get into a fight. But 3 games later, you blade them in the shin. Like so what the ability to defer and to handle it in whatever fashion one feels.
They're probably also friends and all those kinds of things, that they respect each other. So he probably didn't. But there's a comedian instinct. I saw this. That was an open mic in here in Texas. I was saying there's many open mics, but
You know, I've gone to a few pieces. Yeah, yes.
no. So there is more sort of rougher kind of.
Yeah, you've been hanging out in like West Texas.
Yeah, exactly.
Austin's too tame for Lex, so he's like heading to West Texas.
Exactly. I put on a cowboy hat and instantly I became a cowboy. I'm talking like a cowboy. I mean, I belong out there in the desert.
He's gone from eating, meat and athletic greens to rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes.
Exactly right. No, there was a open mic. It was late at night, and I was one of the only people in the audience. There's a couple of drunk folks, a few drunk folks. One of them was a couple, and like bikers, like helmet, a guy and a girl. And then the comedian, the open mic comedian, did a joke about people who wear helmets. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but he did the joke. And then the guy about women who wear helmets. And the guy, this exact same situation. The guy stood up, walked to him. There's no slap. It's so interesting because this happened before the Will Smith thing. So he walked up to the comedian and said he like uh, he, I think he like pointed his finger down and told him to stop or something like that, and then sat down. This is an audience of like 6 people, right? And at midnight around then, there's nobody, no security, nothing in Texas, which implies it. I mean, this guy was the energy drunk, but also a biker, and his what he felt this lady was now attacked by the comedian, his words. And the comedian was a kind of out of shape, small guy, so it's not threatening at all, and probably in trouble. And the comedian, after he sat down, he looked a little bit scared. He paced back and forth, and then he did the joke again. And I was sitting, and I leaned back, and I touched because that is common. And the guy was getting angrier and angrier, and he just sat there. And the comedian went on for a couple more minutes, and then did another bad joke, but another joke about it. It's just like he leaned into it. If you go to a small comedy club, open mic or otherwise, you're in the shooting gallery. Like you're basically there, teed up as a pin to get it. We went and saw Andrew Scholes in San Francisco. Yeah, it was hilarious. It was amazing. I mean, he's just masterful in his ability to command the audience. But I felt for the people up front, but no sympathy either. Because you buy tickets to sit up front at a Scholes show, you're gonna get it. But he was very loving. Yeah. And it's funny. First of all, it's funny. The funniness really helps him. But the ethic of the comedian is that fearlessness. What I really like is like the danger, there's risk to comedy, and there's also consequences. Have you watched that show, what was it, the Marvelous Miss Maisel show? It's really good. I watched a few of them. Guilty pleasure there. She plays a comic in I think it's the mid 1960s in New York, and there's a character that somewhat resembles Lenny Bruce. It's sort of meant to be Lenny Bruce, and they're always getting arrested and this kind of thing. I didn't learn about it from Joe. Anyway, the writing is great. It's very funny. But that comedy is designed to push boundaries and to say the thing that people feel they can't say. Not something in science, right? Science, you're supposed to etiquette is a big part of how you communicate ideas. It's about constraining communication. This is something I confess on the podcast, like the goals of making it clear, interesting, surprising, and actionable. You have to constrain the amount and the style of information. Otherwise, it becomes something else altogether. Right? I saw Sandra Pichai, Google CEO, said that he likes the thing you mentioned, not the yoga nidra, but the NSDR, non-sleep deep rest podcast over meditation. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. Why? What do you think that? What do you think the difference is? Yeah, so non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, is an acronym that I coined because it encompasses a lot of practices that are not meditation per se, but that bring the brain and body into a state of relaxation and focus. So hypnosis is one variant of NSDR. There are other variants of NSDR. You can just look these up and find them. And I think that they caught on, and that the Google the CEO of Google is an avid practitioner of NSDR because it has this amazing ability to reset your energy levels and focus, whereas with meditation, many people find meditation hard, and part of the reason they find it hard is that it requires focus. NSDR is a state which is very calm and relaxing. You don't have to work too hard. You're just listening to a script, whereas most forms of meditation, not all, but most forms of meditation involve cranking up the activity in your prefrontal cortex and trying to see your thoughts as opposed to thinking your thoughts, or focus on your breath, but then third personating yourself in some respect. And that's work. And so many people who meditate quite intensely feel more exhausted. Now, that doesn't mean that meditation doesn't have any utility, but it's distinctly different than NSDR. And I think that people are working, certainly the CEO of Google after that, is working very hard and using his forebrain
if he's going to have 20 or 30 minutes to take a break, he should, and I think this is what he's doing, he should go out for a jog and not listen to or sit there in the chair and just zone out or do NSDR. The problem is people are not that good at shifting states. We are all actually pretty good at, even people with severe ADHD, I made an episode about this, can become hyper-focused on things that they actually enjoy. Because dope and most of the drugs designed to treat ADHD are drugs that increase the levels of dopamine. So when you like something, there's dopamine release to focus. It's when you don't like something that's hard to focus. Shifting states is hard. I'm sure you've experienced this if you've ever been in deep research or podcasting, and then all of a sudden you go for a run. You probably spend the first third of that run thinking. And then in the middle third, you're kind of, that thinking is fractured a bit. And then in the final third is when you finally get to relax. Because the brain doesn't shift states very quickly. We can go from sleep to wakefulness quickly. We can go from wakefulness to sleep quickly. But we don't shift between different states of consciousness like a step function. Except in rare cases, right? Fear is one. All of a sudden we hear an explosion right now, it's a step function. We're in fear, or we're in alertness, right? A heightened state of alertness. But NSDR is terrific at allowing people to learn to shift their state. And I actually would venture to argue that part of the value of meditation and exercise is the actual state that you get into in deep meditation and exercise. But just as valuable is the transition that you have to take yourself through from one state of mind to the other and then back again. When I look, David Goggins, he always continues to come up, because he represents so many important things: drive, determination, override of emotional state, going from being a 300-pound plus person to a fit person to, he's never revealed anything substantial about what he ate or what he didn't eat. He basically says, like, listen, run a lot, eat less, right? But what's remarkable is so much of what he says is about those transitions, about taking oneself from a state of, I don't want to scruffing oneself like you're going to do it anyway. And then being able to carry that into regular life, so to speak. So I think that NSDR is immensely powerful. It's zero cost, and one of the reasons I'm such a fan of people doing it is that most people don't stick to the meditation practice. There have also been a few cases, you might find this interesting. There's a book by Scott Carney, I forget what it's called. I think it's called The Transcendence Trap or something. I'm going to have that title wrong, but there have been a fair number of cases of people that go and do very extensive meditation, silent meditation retreats, who then return to normal life and end up killing themselves. There are states of mind inside of extended meditations or silent meditations that are very beneficial, and I'm certainly not suggesting people don't meditate. But I know at least one person who came back from one of these long extended meditation retreats and wasn't able to shift their state back into one that was functional in their regular life. And that book includes a very traumatic story. I don't want people to read it in case people check out the book, but Scott told the story to me directly once, where someone feels they've reached enlightenment and then commit suicide. So these very unusual brain states are potentially hazardous if people can't return.
So it's nice to focus not on those brain states, but instead on the shifting.
Right. I do. This morning I woke up a little bit earlier than I would have liked. I use this Reverie app that's research-backed, REVERI.com. There's a free version of it, or you can try it for free. So I feel this for hypnosis, and I do a self-hypnosis to put me back into sleep. And if I can't sleep, just put me into a state of deep relaxation. I would put hypnosis under the category of NSDR, yoga nidra under the category of NSDR. There are now some NSDR scripts online. If you just go to YouTube, that you can just listen to. Do
you like those?
I do, yeah. I think the one from Mayfor is quite good. I have an affiliation with them, but it's free, so I feel confident mentioning it. I do. I really like the Reverie app. I can and the more you do them, the more quickly you can shift your brain into a state of deep relaxation. I will sometimes stop mid-podcast. Sometimes our recordings go 7-8 hours, and I'll stop and I'll do a 1-minute hypnosis. They have 1-minute hypnosis inside Reverie. You're only going to find that 1-minute hypnosis is effective if you are routinely doing 10, 15-minute hypnosis in addition to that. Meaning, I do it every other day, so 10.
So is there a YouTube 1-minute hypnosis, or is this?
There are, but inside of Reverie as well, you can find them online. A really good.
Pull it up, sorry.
Yeah, so who's good in it? Michael Seeley, Sealey. he has some long hypnosis scripts. But again, these are all free, and there's a lot of good research now on neural networks, and it shifts your so-called default mode network, which shifts how much of your forebrain you're using, and it also is very, very good at I get so many questions about, hey, I'm really upset. I found out about my girlfriend's sexual path. I said, hey, I'm so upset. I found out that my boyfriend was cheating. Or, oh, so-and-so died. How do I get over these emotions? How do I deal with them? And hypnosis has shown to be very useful for people to learn to bring themselves into a state of deep relaxation, to literally project in their mind's eye these very intense things that they don't like. And then for people to associate with other emotions in their body, to learn to be calm while feeling your feelings, to dissociate the mind-body communication to some extent.
You just observe the feelings.
Observe them and start to associate them with positive experience. You're an Android guy, so soon it should be available on Android.
And then it doesn't exist for me.
Yeah, I know.
Only,
I don't get
Android is a device of the people. All you elitist people with your iPhones.
You can tell me this about Android. Now you want to. This is the one thing that gets me, because I'm very close to someone who uses Android. I feel like that.
So you have great people in your life. That's good
to know. No, the messages always look green to me, but I answer yours. But I feel like the Android phones are very trigger happy. Like anything I touch does something, whereas the Apple phone is kind of built for like a macaque monkey to be able to operate, which is great for me because I'm more of a macaque monkey and you're more sophisticated.
Oh, I see.
I think you have to be
more sensitive.
You have to have, I've got fat fingers, I've got clumsy fingers.
The Android is too, well, maybe you need to soften your touch.
What I would do is go into the most popular, because there's some older ones that I really like. Don't always go for that. So I'll do this one, the hypnosis for clearing subconscious negativity. That's an hour-long one. The sleep and anxiety one, 40 minutes. But those you listen to as you fall asleep. But we're going to do this now.
Yeah.
I have created this hypnosis recording for to help you.
This is the voice. How often does the voice pop up?
And at the same time, you don't watch it. You just listen to it. Now, one of the most important things of the self-hypnosis experience is to know and understand. So people really should know that stage hypnosis is about the hypnotist getting you to do things you didn't normally do. Self-hypnosis, which is what we're talking about here, reverie in this, is about you getting your brain into the state that you want. And again, there's a ton of neuroimaging data and work on trauma and pain relief, and our labs are working on this with David Spiegel's lab. I really encourage people to explore NSDR, and if this feels a little too wacky and out there, then I would just put in NSDR into YouTube, and there's some good NSDR scripts.
Yeah, by the way, there's a fan of your podcast.
Yeah, so I don't know him, and but I get a lot of media outlets picked up on his love of NSDR, and I have to imagine running juggle